Our first speaker, let's get started. We're wasting time here. Sorry, I've got my sheets here. Okay, our first speaker is an amazing man who has fought the good fight and stood his ground. He's a man of integrity and honor, but most of all, he's a man of God, a man who honors and reveres our Creator, and through that reverence to our Creator, it has made him the man that he is. I would like to welcome Ryan Bundy.
Standing ovation for Ryan.
Well, I thank you guys all for coming tonight. I was invited to come and speak, and I have been contemplating what to say. And I don't want to have to hold that thing. You know, I want to start out with speaking about who we really are. It's been mentioned already here tonight, but I want you all to know, and I think you already know, but that first and foremost, we are children of God, and that He is our Creator, and that I am amenable to Him and to no other, that I pledge my allegiance to God and to no other. God created man, and He created this earth. And He gave man dominion over the earth, and the fowls of the air, and the fish of the sea, and the animals, and the plants, and the herbs. And He gave them to man so that he might use, and that he might use to live and to enjoy. He gave it to man for our prosperity and for our pleasure. And He also gave men their agency, the ability to choose for themselves how they should act. This is freedom. Now, we are accountable for our acts, of course, and one day we will answer to God according to our acts. But we are free to choose how we will act. This freedom is important. This freedom is an eternal principle, one that existed before this world did, and one that will exist after we are off of it. And we have rights. We have the right, first and foremost, to the right to our life. For God created us and put us here and gave us our life, and no man has the right to take another man's life. Second of all, our liberty. Our second most fundamental right. We have the right to be free to choose for ourselves how we will act. And of course, we have the right to pursue happiness in the way we choose. And no man has the right to tell us how to pursue that happiness. And involved in that pursuit of happiness comes the right and control and ownership of property, and how to use that property. Because we have these rights, we establish governments. Governments do not give us our rights. Our rights come from God, and they exist prior to the existence of any government.
That's right.
Governments are created as a servant and a tool of man to protect our rights. Government is to aid the individual in claiming, using, and defending our rights. And government is an effective tool when operating properly. Governments are instituted among men for our benefit. And when they are operating properly to benefit us, they are very good. Many want to call us anti-government. That is not true. We are very in favor of a government that operates properly according to these principles which I just spoke. Government is not supposed to be a controller. They're not supposed to be a dictator. In America, that is one of the miracles of America, is that the people are the sovereign. A sovereign is the one who has the ultimate control and authority. In a kingdom, the king is the sovereign, and what he says goes. The buck stops there. And it doesn't matter what anyone else says. But the miracle in America is that the people are the sovereign. And what the people say goes. And the buck stops there. And our founding fathers created this form of government for a moral and religious people. And they stated that it is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other. In other words, we must be men and women of morality. We must be able and capable of governing ourselves, using that agency that God gave us to choose for ourselves how we will act, and using those acts in righteous ways, to be able to govern ourselves and restrain ourselves from conduct which is not proper. Our freedom should be complete. We should be able to choose for ourselves how we should act in every given situation, to do whatever you want. We were criticized in the court in Oregon at one of the hearings prior to trial, wherein the prosecutor, speaking of my brother Ammon, says, oh, well, he thinks he can do whatever he wants. Well, yeah, absolutely. That's freedom. Okay? Now, there is a limit on freedom. And that limit is that no man has the right to encroach upon the rights of another. First, again, our foremost right is the right to life, and no man has the right to take the life of another, except in defense, to protect your own life. No one has the right to take the liberty of another. Liberty is very, very important. Now, you know, this issue that we have stood up for is mostly about land ownership, and the right to use and control and benefit from the land and the resources. Because everything we have comes from the land. Everything. And in there is also the definition of wealth. All wealth comes from the land. Everything you have, from the clothes you wear, to the chair you're sitting on right now, to your phones, to your computers, to this building, to the cars you drove here, to the food you eat, it all derives from the land. And so those who control the land and the resources control the wealth. And if they control that wealth, then they can control everything else. And I believe that God intended for that to be in the hands of individuals and not governments.
Amen.
The right to use the land and to use these minerals and these different things comes by those who first use it. It's prior appropriation. Our water rights are based upon that principle. And also beneficial use. If you put an element to use and you're there using it, then that begins to establish a right. And if that right is then questioned, then you must stand and defend it. And that defense sometimes is easy, and that defense at other times is difficult, as we well know. But our founding fathers understood these principles. And they understood the principles of what government is supposed to be. And I believe that they created a form of government that was supposed to follow these principles. I believe that they created a central government that was supposed to benefit the states by creating a union of the several states. And I think that that is largely forgotten. We just pledged to a flag and said that it's one nation under God. And I would suggest to you that it's not one nation, that we are 50 nations. That yes, we are united for common causes and purposes, and therefore it can be said that we are one nation also. But let's not forget the individuality of the several states, and that each and every state is significant and its own entity. And there's good evidence of this. I want to speak just briefly about the founding of our country. First of all, we were called colonies. There was 13 colonies. And a colony, by definition, is not its own. It is an extension of something greater. In this case, an extension of Great Britain. Other countries have their colonies around the world, but Great Britain had these. And of course, they had other colonies around the world as well. And our founding fathers, after trying to do all they could to have their government, Great Britain, recognize their rights, to allow them to be free, and yet they incurred atrocity after atrocity. Finally, they said no more, and they wrote up the Declaration of Independence. And that declaration changed some things. And that there was a transfer that took place at that point. I want to just point that out. That in the last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, it states that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, and that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right ought to do. So right there in that sentence, we see the transfer. They started out calling them colonies, which is what they were, and they ended up saying that these are free and independent states. There's a difference in definition because a state is not a colony. Colony is not a state. A state is independent. It's free. It's not an extension of something else. It stands on its own. Okay? Now, Great Britain, of course, didn't easily accept that. They said, no, we're not going to allow these colonies to become states. We do not want men to have their freedom. We want to maintain control. We know that there's good land over there and good resources, and we want to keep control of those resources. And so we're not going to allow that to happen. And of course, a war ensued, and the American people had to fight a bloody war. It cost lots of lives. But in the end, and I believe with the providence of Almighty, that we know history, we won that war. Amen. Okay. When someone puts their foot down, someone else is going to try to sweep it off. And they've got to stand strong, or that's going to take place. But our founding fathers stood strong, and they had the help of our Father in heaven, and they established that these are states. Now, at the end of that war, there was a peace treaty signed. And that treaty is called the Treaty of Paris, I believe, because it was first signed in Paris. And all the states didn't sign it at the same time. They didn't all go over to Paris, but it went around. Eventually, they all got signed. Now, that treaty was eventually signed by 14 states. Obviously, the 13 states would have been those who signed, but who was the 14th state?
England.
You stand up and say that louder.
England.
England. Great Britain. The state of Great Britain. Okay? And it mentioned it right there. I already read it. The state of Great Britain. Again, we're getting into that terminology, that word state. What does state mean? Okay? We call other nations around the world states. The state of Israel, the state of this, state of that. Okay, so what is a state? What is a state? Now, this is an important principle because at this point in time in history, Great Britain was militarily probably the most powerful country in the world. And they had lands and colonies all around the world. They said the sun never set. And now, all of a sudden, these 13 states were equal in status in the world with that great state of Great Britain, that powerful state. They just beat them, for one thing. Okay? And it's important to understand that this treaty didn't have two signatures on it. It didn't have the signature of the United States and the signature of Great Britain. No, it had 14 signatures on it. And now that also shows that each state separately and individually and independently had that same status in the world as Great Britain. Okay? This wasn't one nation under God at that point. This was 13 nations, and they individually signed that treaty so that the peace treaty applied to each and every country involved. Now, it was their intent to unify, and they did under the Articles of Confederation, and later they perfected that union under the Constitution for the United States of America, wherein a central government was created and formed a union. Now, there's another term, union. So I want to back up the state just a little bit. I'm going to ask the question. Within these 13 original states, how much of the land within each of them did Great Britain retain? Can anyone give me an answer? None. Great Britain didn't retain any of it. Okay, so could it be concluded then that all of the land within a state belonged to the state and their people?
Yes.
100%.
Yep.
Okay? There wasn't a central government at that point. It didn't belong to Great Britain. It belonged to each and every individual state, 100% of it. Okay, so the definition of a state can be determined or can be found by the characteristics of the original 13 states. And 100% of the land ownership is one of the characteristics of a state. All right? Now, we knew that our founding fathers anticipated that there would be new states admitted into the Union. And discussion was had amongst them about how this was to take place. And there was discussion on whether a new state should be subordinate to the original 13 or how big they should be. They didn't want a new state to be bigger and larger to be able to overpower the original states. Anyway, there was a lot of discussion to this matter, and it was decided that each new state had to be equal in every respect to the original 13 states. And this became known as the equal footing doctrine. Now, this was actually discussed prior to the Constitution. It was discussed actually during the Articles of Confederation. Of course, there was further discussion after the Constitution as well, or part of it anyway. But that determination is an important determination because one of our founding fathers stated that, and I'm paraphrasing this, I'm not quoting exactly, but that if they were not equal in every respect, that the people would either not join the Union, the state would not join the Union, or the people would quickly revolt. And why would they revolt? Because they're not equals. Because they don't have the same rights. And so this is an important factor. So that brings us up to today. Is Montana a state? Are you sure? I'm not too sure. Does the state of Montana, the Montana state, does it own 100% of its land and resources? So Montana must not be a state. How does that make you feel? Like a colony, like a district, like a subdivision, like a province. Okay. I want to go back to the term union. Our founders created a union. A union of several states. That's how they say it. A union of several states. And a union is joining of two or more things, like a husband and wife. But those two things are separate and independent on their own. They join together for common cause and purposes, but not completely. They're still separate beings. A husband and wife join in holy matrimony and therefore form a union, sacred union. But they're still two separate beings. A union, by definition, cannot be one. Cannot be one nation. Must be several. And when they're joined in a union, they're joined for specific common causes and purposes, but not for everything. And our Constitution, the Constitution 4, and I'm going to press the word for, and I'll explain that in a minute, outlines what those common causes and purposes are. And then expressly in the 10th Amendment, it states that if we didn't give Congress the authority for certain things, other things that are not listed in here, then we retain those to ourselves, to the states respectively, or to the people. In other words, we're not united in these other things. We're independent in these other things. And the 9th Amendment specifically states that these rights that we have are more numerous than can be numbered. I'm just going to quote it, read it. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. In other words, we can't list them all, and so if they're not listed here, they can't be denied to us. But if we want to believe that this is just one nation, and that the states are just subdivisions of, then the name of this country is wrong. Because the definitions don't match. If we believe that, then we're going to have to change the name of this country to the Imperial Provinces of America. I don't like the sound of that. Okay, and yet that is how it's being treated. We're being treated as provinces, not states. This central government is acting as an empire and not just a central government to protect our rights. And that is improper. It's improper. That's not how our founding fathers outlined this great country. So the land and the resources rightfully, constitutionally belong to, and I might add biblically, I do believe, belong to the people individually. And we have government that is supposed to help us to claim, use, and defend those rights to that use. But that's not what's taking place. And so this battle, so to speak, has ensued, this conflict. On our ranch down in Nevada, we saw that the government was trying to run us out of business. And it's not just a business, but it's our livelihood, it's our life, it's our history, it's everything we are. And yet they want to just end it like, oh, you don't matter. Okay? The individual matters, and we take care of the individual. When each and every one of our rights are recognized, then the whole is automatically taken care of. When we try to think, oh, let's take care of the whole and forget about individuality, well, then individuals can get peeled off and run over, and their lives and their rights don't matter. Oh, we're taking care of the greater good. Okay? But if we take care of the individual, each and every individual right, then the whole is taken care of automatically. We don't worry about the whole. Should never worry about the whole. If you worry about the individual, then the whole is taken care of automatically. Protect individual rights. Protect individual rights. The Hammonds are in a very similar situation, where their rights were also being trampled upon. And the government trying to take and make their own and assume ownership and control of the land and the resources to enrich themselves, whether individually or as a group, still was taking place. And now we know that Dwight and Stephen are both in prison, serving 5-year terms for things that were not crimes. I want to talk about crime for just a little bit. I talked about our rights to our life, liberty, and property already. And our freedom, that we are to be free to choose whatever we want to do. Whatever we want to do. That's your right, to be free. And of course, our limit upon that freedom is that we're not supposed to encroach upon the rights of another. And so the very definition of crime and the very definition of criminal are those who do knowingly, willfully, intentionally encroach upon the life, liberty, or property of another. That's the only proper definition of crime. And laws should only be made to protect that. And that's it. In other words, someone who does something that does not do harm or damage to another person's life, liberty, or property is not a crime, regardless of what our legislatures tried to put on the books to call crime. Okay, we call those victimless crimes. There's no victim. No one was harmed. There should not be any law that is put on any book. But yet we fill our jails by the thousands, hundreds of thousands, with people who have not truly committed a crime. And that those who do harm to others are true criminals. And when our government becomes the violator of our rights, damaging our life, liberty, and property, rather than protecting it, then they have become criminal.
That's right. Amen.
And they take it upon themselves to enforce with the barrel of a gun those things which they want to. Those things which are not crimes. Violating. And that's what happened to the Hammonds. That's what happened and is happening to us. And they took the life of Lavoy Finicum. He did not commit a crime. He did no harm. There is no man, no woman in this world that can stand up and point to Lavoie and say, you harmed me. Not one. He committed no crime, and yet they killed him dead. And they attempted to kill me, Shauna, and the others that were in that vehicle. Put a bullet in me. Without excuse, without cause, without reason. Other than they wanted to enforce their power, their ideas. And government is nothing more than men. Sir, do you have the right to take life? No. Can you delegate that right to another? Do you have the right to protect your own life?
I do.
Can you delegate that right to another? No. Okay. You can delegate it partly. That's what we do to our sheriff. That's where he gets his authority. Okay. But does that mean you relinquish your right to protect your own life?
No.
Okay. We can't, government has no authority in and of itself. Again, our government is a creation of we the people. Okay? And government only gets its authority from we the people. As we specify, our central government gets its authority from we the people, and that is actually stated in the preamble to the Constitution, which it says, we the people of the United States. And the last line says, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. We the people are the sovereign. Okay. You telling me it's time? Is it? I appreciate this opportunity to come to speak to you. And I hope that the things I've said will help you think and encourage you to study and learn. I don't expect you to take my word for anything. Please investigate what I've said and find out for yourselves. And always, always call upon the Lord. Call upon God for guidance.
Yeah.